So right up front, here's the contents of this video. I'll be showing you how to dissect your syllabus for online learning, thinking about course objectives, the learning management system, the online course modules that you'll need to set up, accessibility for all of your students, the difference between synchronous and asynchronous, and then all of these different pieces and parts that belong in your online course. So thinking about assessments and assignments, activities, group work, and online lectures. When you have a course that's already been established to be a traditional lecture course, in-person kind of course, and you have the syllabus already created, these are some of the tricks that I've discovered as I've gone through this process of taking my courses, and I teach graduate statistics courses, so taking my courses from a traditional lecture setting to an online setting. And so what I first do is I dissect my syllabus. So I take my syllabus and I break it up into these different parts and pieces so that I can think about them individually on how they need to be formatted and be a part of the online course. So the first thing is I pull out my course objectives, because these still are going to be the key guide for what students need to be learning and how they'll proceed through the course to be able to master the content by the end of the course. So I pull out my course objectives first and make sure that I'm really solid on what those course objectives are. Then I pull out any of my course assessments. So any of those kinds of assessments that are related to your objectives that are showing that students are mastering the content of your course. So these could be quizzes, or they could be exams or projects, large projects, anything that's summative that you are using to really show that students are mastering the content and mastering those course objectives. After pulling out the course assessments, I pull out any of the course assignments, and these would be any of the formative assessments. So any of the practice, any of the different activities or assignments that you have that would help lead up to your course assessments. So these could be things like group work or reflective journals, discussions that you would have in class, practice problems, any of those types of things would be part of this course assignments and practice. And we pull these out into these different groups because these tend to look a little bit different online, and you work with them differently in an online setting than you would in a traditional lecture setting. So after pulling out the course assignments, then pull out all of your course lectures. So typically what I do is I look at what are all of the topics that need to be covered, and for each topic, about how much time do I use to lecture on that topic. So I know that there's some of my topics that are harder to for students to be able to conceptualize and be able to get, and so I have more time built into my course to be able to lecture on those kinds of topics. And so you want to just get a list of your topics so that you know the number of lectures that you usually are doing for each topic. And you really want to be aware of how much time you usually lecture. So timing of the lectures is different in the online setting, and we'll look at that a little bit more later on in this video. Lastly, you want to pull together all of those other course resources that you make available to students that may or may not already be online. And so you want to make sure that if there's ever any kind of handouts or articles or anything that you use in your course, that they are available online. So look at your syllabus and see where you would have those additional course resources and make sure that they are in a digital format. So then before you can begin to start putting all these identified pieces online for your students, you have to stop and make sure that you think about who your students are and how they learn, so that when you're going through these different parts and pieces, you are thinking about the online resources and tools that will help your students the most. And this is going to be different for different courses and for different professors, because it just depends on who your students are. And so you have to keep in mind, you may have to have some additional pieces or have the format of your course in a particular way to make sure that your course is still conveying the content in a succinct way for your students to learn. So one example that I kind of gave already is knowing which of your topics require multiple lectures, so that I can plan how to be able to deliver that content. And sometimes I may also create like a frequently asked questions document for the topics I know that students have a lot of extra questions on. So then that's an additional resource, and I can take that time out of the time that I'm actually lecturing. I just wanted to say here again that it is really important that you have your course objectives remain the focal point of your course, even when it's online. And in some cases, it's more important to have those course objectives be the guide for the course when it's in an online setting, because you want to make sure that your students are meeting those course objectives and are able to show the mastery of the course content. So something else that we have to think about before you can even put your course online is what type of learning management system you're using. So it'll be important for you to know and understand the basics of the learning management system before you begin to put it online. And so the learning management system is wherever your online course is going to be housed. So platforms like Canvas and Blackboard are learning management systems. But you could also use something like Google Docs or Google Drive as a learning management system as well. So if you currently do not have like a system, a learning management system that's set up like Canvas or Blackboard for online courses, you could use things you already have within like the Office 365 suite and Google Drives and Google Docs to be able to house your course. It'll just be really important that you make sure that the structure is very tight and succinct so that students can navigate very cleanly through your course. And that brings us to online course modules. So before putting your course online, you have to look at and think about what are some of the things that are very similar or that are consistent from week to week. So these kinds of things, just being able to have some consistency week over week is going to make it easier for your students to be able to navigate through the course, especially if they haven't been online before. So you want to make it easy for them to be able to navigate through the course and know what they are to be completing each week. And so think about the pieces of your course that are offered consistently, such as your weekly lectures, regular readings, weekly quizzes, and those are the things that you want to build into the structure first when you're first building this online course. So you want to think about user experience, so how your students are navigating through that course before you're thinking about the content, because it's very easy to just start putting content in, and then it gets very jumbled, and that makes it harder for students to be able to navigate through the course, especially if they haven't taken an online course before. So typically I have weekly modules where I try and keep some things very consistent week after week. And so like in my weekly module, I'll have something like a weekly content page, which will have some of the content videos and lecture notes that are for the week. I'll have like a weekly quiz or reflection journal prompt. And then I always include a question and answer discussion board in each one of my modules so that students always have a place right within the course to be able to come and ask questions and get some additional help. And so most learning management systems automatically will organize some of your materials, but they organize them by what they are. So they organize them like by quizzes or assignments, discussion boards, announcements, etc. And you don't want to use that organization. You want to make sure that your organization of your course is more specific to how students are going to be navigating through the course. And so then it's very clear how they're able to get through the course. And so then the focus can still be on the content and mastering the content and not on the issues of navigation. And so you want to set up the shells for your courses where you have your course and you have your modules, so you can put in all of your modules. So I put in one module for every week. I go in and I put in all of my consistent content. So I'll go in and I'll put a page in for my weekly content for each one of my weeks. I'll put the quizzes in and make sure that they are in each one of the weeks, and I'll put my question and answer discussion board for each one of the weeks. So you set up that shell first, and then you start putting in these additional pieces. So once all of the modules are set up and the consistent content is in place, then you could add things that are different. So if you have a midterm one week or a really large assignment that's due over several weeks, then you can go put in those specific assignments. But first get the content in there that's consistent. Make sure that your shell is very consistent in how students navigate through, and then add in those specific assignments. Another thing that we have to keep in mind when you're moving a course online is the accessibility for the students. So usually we think about accessibility for students with different learning abilities, and we are making sure that we're giving these students particular accommodations like additional time on their quizzes or exams, or a note taker to be able to help them take notes. But now that this course is in an online setting, accessibility has to be considered for all of your students. So on top of thinking about things like the amount of time or the number of attempts on a quiz, we also have to think about things like content availability offline or on a mobile device for our students that do not have computer or internet access at home. And we also have to think about things like what technology is required to be able to complete the activities that we give. So if there's a particular piece of software that's needed, is there some open access software? Is there some other ways that we could make sure that students are able to complete these activities even though they may not have the software available to them? And it's also thinking about some of these small details in the videos we create. So making sure that your videos are a time shorter time, that it's better to have more videos that are shorter than less videos that are longer, because attention spans and the likelihood of distractions is a lot more when you're working online. And also for students to be able to take better notes and be able to come back to the material where they're struggling the most. If they have less videos, that makes it easier. So thinking about some of those small details. So in the past, I've mostly taught hybrid and blended courses. And so I have not really thought about some of these types of accessibility as much as I should. And so I want to just say, think about it now, because I'm now having to go back and change some of the courses and redo some of the videos, which is very difficult and more time consuming than if I had made sure that I had these things for accessibility for online students before I began. So now that we've gotten some of those terms and some things that you have to keep in mind as you're putting your course online out of the way, now we can get back to those groups that we made when we were dissecting our syllabus. And so these are our assignments and our assessments. So the summative and the formative assessments, our lecture topics with how much time each topic takes, and the resources that all need to be delivered online. And we start this thinking about the difference between asynchronous and synchronous instruction. And so we need to go through each one of these groups and look at what parts and pieces. Is it the whole group, or is it only certain parts or certain things in the group that need to be asynchronous versus synchronous? So asynchronous instruction means that the students can access these materials or this content anytime from the online learning management system, regardless of how that online learning management system works. Any of your asynchronous content should be available at all time. And so some examples of these are like any of your readings, a lot of your resources. These can be the videos that you put on there, which could be some of your lectures, or parts of your lectures could just be video and be available all the time asynchronously. This would also include things like discussion boards or online quizzes and exams, and most of your individual assignments that you have for students. So when they're practicing on their own, or when they have assignments that they're writing and completing on their own and then submitting, those will all be things that are considered asynchronous. And so they're always available, and students are able to go through them anytime and at their own pace. Asynchronous materials are also really good for accessibility. So if there's things that are really important for students to be able to get, making sure that it's available asynchronously so that they can download them and be able to print them if they need to is really important, and will help with that accessibility piece. And so then the other piece of this, so either you have synchronous or asynchronous. And so synchronous instruction means that students are given a specific date and time to log into a live lecture. So platforms like Zoom, GoToMeeting, WebEx, these are all the things that are used to hold synchronous sessions. And these sessions, you can usually use these for your lectures, but also for your office hours or one-on-one meetings or group meetings. You could use these synchronous sessions also. The other thing to remember with the synchronous sessions is every single synchronous session can be recorded in any of those platforms and then made to be asynchronous. So if you have students that are unable to make it to your live lecture series, if you record it when it's synchronous, so when it's live, then you could post the recording, and then now that's available, that content now is available asynchronously. And so after you've done your groupings of here are your assessments and here are your assignments and your lecture topics and all your resources, now you're ready to be able to start looking at each of these pieces and how it can function and how it needs to look within an online course. So by the time we get to looking at these individual groupings of assessments or assignments or all those different things, we've already done a dissection of our syllabus, so we know what are all the parts and pieces that need to come together to be available online. We've thought about the accessibility of making sure that we know how our students learn and how to make sure that our online course is accessible to all of our students. What are some of the pitfalls that may make it difficult for them to be able to get to the online course? And we've put together the modules so that all of our consistent pieces, so the things that occur every single week, are already put into the online course as a shell. And so then you can start thinking about these individual groupings. So one of these groups is these online assessments and assignments. So these are your summative assessments and your formative assessments. And these can be asynchronous or they could be synchronous. So most all of the learning management systems have quiz functions where you could put quiz and exams online to be available asynchronously. But you also could do your exams synchronously, where you have students come into a live Zoom session, and then once they have logged in, you make the quiz or the exam available. And you could record them sitting and working on the exam. So that's one way that we can, in an online setting, make sure that there's not cheating occurring. So you have to decide which of these online assessments and assignments need to be synchronous and which can be asynchronous. You also, if there's any of your summative or formative assignments that are presentations, all of those can be done synchronously or asynchronously, and you just have to decide which is going to be best for your students to prove mastery. And so usually these online assessments that we think about are just the quizzes and the exams. But you can, even when they're asynchronous, you could set some time limits and the dates that they're available. So you can set some limits onto when these can be done, even in your learning management system and in an asynchronous setting. So many of the online activities, practice, and group work are going to be synchronous, and so that they can be more like when you're in the classroom, but they could also be asynchronous as well. So if you want to make them asynchronous, you could use discussion boards, and you could set up discussion boards in most of those learning management platforms that can be separated by groups so that you could do group work as well. You also can do group work in a synchronous setting by using the breakout rooms and the group settings for whatever synchronous system or platform you're using. So just like in a traditional in-class lecture setting, your online lectures are still going to be like a big piece of your online course. And so you have to think about, well, which of these pieces of your lectures, so knowing what your topics are, knowing how much lecture time you usually allot for each topic, you can look and see, well, what parts of your lecture can just be made videos right away and be put onto your learning management platform as asynchronous content, and which need to be in person, so in a synchronous setting. And typically what I like to do is I like to create videos for all of my lectures so that my synchronous sessions or virtually in-person sessions are used for review and for answering questions and for group work and for activities. Um, and also by having all of those lectures as videos asynchronously, it means students can watch them as many times as they need. And also they can really stop and start to be able to take good notes. So the hope is that they'll do that before they come into the synchronous session. So the time that we have together, which usually is less time than when you're actually in a face-to-face course, can be used in a really consistent, effective way. And so when you're making any of your online lectures into videos, there's some things you should think about. So your videos should be less than 10 minutes each. It's just been found that people's online attention span is pretty short, and so this video is definitely out of that range. But you really want those videos to be less than 10 minutes each. And so how I typically do this is I create my lecture PowerPoint just like I would when I would be in class in person. But then what I do is I divide it into groups where each group has 1 to 5 slides. So I look and I try and break it up into subtopics, and keeping in mind that it's 10 minutes or less. So even if I have a video that only has 1 slide and is only 3 minutes, if I've made another video be 10 minutes instead of 13 minutes, then that's usually better. So I make my whole PowerPoint of what I want to talk about in the lecture, and then I split it up into groups of 1 to 5 slides each. And then I record each group of slides as its own video. And a lot of people like to use Zoom and also the learning management video recording features. So Canvas and Blackboard and those learning management systems, they have video record systems there that you could use. I tend to like, and for those that don't have learning management systems and are using something like Google Docs or Google Drive, I like to use PowerPoint, and that's how I made this video. And I like to use PowerPoint because you can create your videos based off of your narrations for each slide. And so then if I need to make an adjustment, or I did something wrong in my recording, or I missed a piece that was important, all you have to do is go in and add a slide or take a slide out or re-record one slide instead of having to re-record the entire video. Now, this is not as bad if you are keeping your videos to 10 minutes or less, but it can get really bad if you decide to just record one video for your whole lecture, which could be, up to an hour, hour and a half. Then you have to re-record the whole thing, and that's a pain in the butt, and none of us want to do it. So I do like PowerPoint for being able able to come in and make some changes to one slide at a time. You could even make changes to what's on the slide without changing the narration of the slide. So you could redo a video just by changing what appears on the slide, but not changing the narration of it. So making sure that you understand that your videos need to be less than 10 minutes each. Don't follow my example for this video. I wanted to make sure you had everything in one place for this, but typically they are less than 10 minutes. So last thing is step back, take a breath, and be creative. Like, we've come up with so many creative ways of being able to relay content and help students master content within our face-to-face classrooms. We can definitely do it in online as well. It's just the challenge of the technology. But understand that your students are having the challenges with the technology as well. And if they're not, then look to them to help you figure out these little extras that can make your class even better. And think about how you can really be able to bring your teaching style uniquely to an online setting. So whether that's using more video than readings, or using more synchronous sessions than asynchronous materials, whatever you can think of. And all of these learning management systems, so learning management systems like Canvas and Blackboard, they have a lot of features to be able to pull into your online courses. So you can pull in YouTube videos, you could pull in news articles, you could pull in additional websites. The sky's the limit pretty much in there. So take a look at what is available to you already. And if it's the thinking about the generation of videos and content, there are lots of places online that you can get material that's already created for you. So if you're overwhelmed by thinking about recreating all of your lectures or recreating a bunch of content, don't. Really be creative in how you look for things. So go to YouTube, and you'll be surprised how many people are actually making videos about linear regression that you could plop right into your courses. So take some time and really look at all of those little extras that you could add in, because those little details are going to make it easier for your students to navigate through the online course, and it's also going to help them to engage. So especially students that haven't been online before, the toughest part for them is figuring out how to stay engaged and to continue to engage in the course.